In the NBA, the shot that gets all the glory in today's game is the three-point shot. The art form of being an elite mid-range shooter has become lost among the three-point revolution and almost vilified by modern-day NBA fans. In a way, I understand it. 3 points is more than 2, and going 6, 12 from the mid-range is the same as going 4, 8 from 3. Seeing the mid-range deteriorate into a shot that players almost shy away from has been maddening to an extent as well, considering the amount of players who made entire careers of dominating from those spots. I mean, imagine telling Michael Jordan or Kevin Durant they were taking bad shots just because they feasted off mid-range opportunities in their career. It would be ludicrous. Of course, those aren't the only two players who were elite at knocking down shots from just outside the paint to just inside the three-point line. Plenty of players over the years, and even in today's NBA, have mastered the art of the mid-range shot, and they are the players we are here today to honor. As the league keeps evolving, there seem to be two options for offensive players. Work the ball around until an open three-point shot is available, or work the ball into the paint and convert or draw a foul. This has led to the mid-range shot hanging on for dear life. Well, below are 25 players who carved out some of the greatest legacies in NBA history, with the mid-range shot being one of their primary weapons. 10. Steve Nash. Steve Nash is far more recognized and celebrated as one of the greatest playmakers and point guards in NBA history than for his shooting efforts. The two-time MVP earned those accolades by leading one of the most potent offenses in league history while capturing assists titles annually. What people fail to recognize also during this time was his ability as a shooter that made him even more dangerous on offense. Nash is a three-time member of the NBA's 50-40-90 club, reserved for only the most efficient scorers in the game. While he could step out and knock down threes from time to time, his best and purest shots came from the mid-range. In his NBA career, Nash made a whopping 47.7% of his mid-range shots. Of his 17,387 career points, 27.7% of them came from as a shooter in the mid-range, far more than any other spot on the court in his career. Nash's playmaking made him a legend in NBA history, but his shooting made him the complete package when he had the ball in his hands. My hope is that more people continue to do their research and realize just how deadly he was as a mid-range shooter than he gets credit for. 9. Carmelo Anthony. From the moment Carmelo Anthony made his NBA debut in 2003-04, we all knew how special of an offensive talent he was going to become. You just don't win scoring titles and land in the top 10 for career points without being absolutely special from all three levels. As his career progressed, he began to take far more shots from three-point land as well, but what can never be denied is his elite play from the mid-range. As a matter of fact, in terms of efficiency, Carmelo Anthony and Kobe Bryant are nearly identical in their careers. Anthony is a career 41.1% shooter from mid-range, while Bryant shot 42.2%. The only difference between the two is that Anthony attempted 3,000 fewer shots from those spots than Bryant. Even with those differences, Anthony's mid-range game has accounted for 25.7% of his total career points, showing the balance he used to secure his spot in history. From 10 feet out to 22 feet, Anthony was a 41.5% shooter in his career, which accounted for 41.5% of his total career attempts. The most beautiful part of his mid-range game was the way he played with his back to the basket and used his strength to create the necessary space in order to attempt the easiest shot. As far as the mid-range game goes, they do not get much better than Carmelo Anthony. 8. Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce is another player whose career has become severely underrated since it ended not long ago. The fact is that Paul Pierce was not only one of the most clutch players in NBA history, but also one of its toughest shot makers ever. Pierce was strong, and although most of his offense would come from a face-up style, his ability to create space using his body was probably one of his greatest weapons. I cannot count the number of times Pierce would come down the lane and stop on a dime for a short jumper in a big moment during a game. If a smaller defender happened to get put on him, he would take him out to the woodshed and beat him until the opposing coach made a change. From the mid-range in his career, Pierce shot a cool 41.3% on nearly 7,000 attempts, a percentage that any voluminous shooter from that range would gladly accept. The best range that Pierce could get his shot off from was anywhere from 10-22 feet. From that range, Pierce shot 41.4% from the field and 47.8% from two-point range overall in his career. With the game on the line, there are few people in NBA history who I would want taking the shot over Paul Pierce. 7. Allen Iverson. There are few players who are considered elite scorers throughout NBA history with the resume of Allen Iverson. He is a former four-time scoring champion and MVP who led a mediocre roster to the NBA Finals in 2001 and stole a game from the powerhouse Lakers. He was a relentless scorer from every level minus the three-point range and showed no fear of taking the ball to the rim despite being just 6'0" feet tall. Given his limited height, Iverson had to get creative from the mid-range as well, which helped him tremendously in his career. Despite being described as inefficient by most, Iverson's 40.4% shooting from 16-22 feet is actually impressive considering the volume at which he attempted those shots. Overall, Iverson shot 39.0% from the mid-range with 6,562 of his 24,368 career points coming off mid-range jumpers and a beautiful floater game as well. One thing I can never knock is Iverson's ability to score the ball, no matter how much it took for him to do so, or the low efficiency it took for him to do so. 6. DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan is an anomaly when it comes to modern-day NBA players. He possesses virtually no three-point game worth speaking of, and never really has in his career. He is, however, one of the greatest mid-range shooters to ever grace the NBA hardwood, and has shown that to be true time and time again. DeRozan is among the elite players in NBA history to shoot over 40.0% from the mid-range for his career, going 40.3% on over 6,400 attempts. What makes him such a great mid-range scorer is actually the combination of two things. First is the way he handles the ball and has control of every movement he makes. When combined with his ability to rise above the defense at the drop of a hat, it makes for one of the deadliest mid-range games we have ever seen. DeRozan is particularly dangerous from the 416-foot range. From this spot on the floor, he shoots over 45.0%, which is tremendous, considering it is where over 40.0% of his attempts come from. Given his accuracy and volume as a mid-range scorer, DeRozan is clearly knocking on the top 5 on this list. 5. Dirk Nowitzki. If Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett are to be considered pioneers of the stretch forward from the mid-range, then Dirk Nowitzki is to be considered the GOAT. Standing 7'0" feet tall, Nowitzki completely baffled defenders with his ability to efficiently knock down shots no matter where he was on the court. Armed with a beautiful touch on the ball as well as a teardrop arc, Nowitzki became one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. Dirk Nowitzki really did most of his damage from the mid-range with his back to the basket. With the ball in his hands and the defender on his back, Nowitzki methodically backed them down until he found his spot. Then, in one swift motion, he would turn and jump on one leg before executing one of the most beautiful fadeaway jumpers you have ever seen in your life. For his career, Dirk shot a ridiculous 47.1% from the mid-range on 13,219 attempts. Of his 31,560 career points, an incredible 39.5% would come from the mid-range. This makes Nowitzki truly elite as a mid-range shooter, and we may never again see a 7-footer rely on this part of his game with this rate of success ever again in our lifetimes. 4. Larry Bird. One of the myths about Larry Bird as a scorer, and more specifically as a shooter, was his dominance from three-point range. While he was efficient, and he did win a three-point contest in his warm-up jacket, he was actually a far more deadly mid-range scorer than any other spot on the floor. Numbers will not tell you about Larry Bird's mid-range game, mostly because shooting stats did not yet exist when he was at his peak. But at 6'10", and with a release above his head, Bird destroyed defenses who had zero answer for his prolific shooting. There are many things about Bird's career that go unrecognized or are undervalued for one reason or another. What can never be denied is how unstoppable he was when shooting the ball from any spot he wished on the floor. 3. Kobe Bryant. You would have to be in complete denial if you didn't think Kobe Bryant's name was going to appear toward the top of this list. In his 20-year career, Bryant made a habit of mimicking Michael Jordan's game that made him so successful during his career. Even more so than Jordan, though, Bryant was an immaculate mid-range shooter because of his ability to fight through contact and make some of the toughest shots you will ever see. Kobe's bread and butter was a spitting image of Jordan as well. I am speaking, of course, about his signature fadeaway jumper from the post, or even a bit further out. Bryant could take advantage of any defender that opposed him once he put his back to them and called for the ball. In a beautiful series of events, Kobe would rise, spin, and release for one of the most perfect shots ever formed. During his career, Bryant scored 5,566 points from the mid-range while shooting 41.2% on those shots. He shot over 43.0% from the 3, 10-foot ranges as well as 10, 16 feet, while also converting 40.2% of his shots from 16, 22 feet. When using the term mid-range assassin, Kobe Bryant should be one of the players you have in mind. 2. Kevin Durant. There are many people within the NBA community who will argue with you until they are red in the face that Kevin Durant is the greatest scorer in NBA history. While I do not agree, the case is a good one, and it starts with Durant's ability as a shooter and scorer from the mid-range. As a four-time scoring champion and one of the most unique talents in NBA history, Durant mastered the art of the mid-range shot to even be considered in this conversation. Over 73.0% of all of Kevin Durant's shot attempts come from within the three-point line, and 52.9% of those can be considered from the mid-range. There is not a single range within those parameters in which his shooting percentage dips below 45.0%, making him easily one of the most efficient mid-range scorers ever. Durant's build and play style are certainly the main driving forces behind these numbers. At 7'0" feet tall, Durant handles the ball as if he were a point guard, making it much easier for him to get to the spots in the mid-range he shoots so well from. With the addition of his quick release that already comes from a high trajectory, his shots are nearly unguardable as he has been for the last 16 years. 1. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is the greatest mid-range shooter in NBA history. With 10 scoring titles to his name and 30.1 points per game for his career, Jordan runs away with this title when considering the fact that all of his shots came from either at the rim or, you guessed it, the mid-range. Most fans will combat this with the fact that Jordan was a ball hog, or that he took too many shots. Well, with 10 of his 15 seasons coming with over 48.5% shooting, I said he earned to shoot as much as he wants. Jordan's mid-range game is arguably the most poetic part of his game, simply because it was not respected as much as it should have been. Too many times Jordan was left free to operate and shoot the ball at will, and too many times it ended up burning the other team. We spoke earlier about Kobe Bryant's fadeaway being his greatest weapon. Well, imagine that but on steroids. Jordan perfected the turnaround fadeaway during his career using his athleticism, power, and skill to operate with the purest signature move in NBA history. Almost all of Jordan's most clutch shots and moments came off mid-range shots. When the greatest scorer of all time uses one specific area of the court to accumulate most of his points, it is safe to say he is the greatest shooter ever from that spot.